Welcome to the closing plenary of the Asian Clean Energy Forum 2022. We hope you've enjoyed the various sessions. In this closing plenary, we'll recap some of the highlights of ACEF 2022 and discuss the Integrated Energy Action Agenda to a low-carbon future. But first, let's run some highlights. Damilola Ogunbiyi, CEO of Sustainable Energy for All, Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All, and co-chair of UN Energy, will share her recorded keynote message on a just and equitable transition, the opportunity for action in Asia and the Pacific.
Distinguished delegates and participants, I am pleased to be speaking to you all today. First of all, I want to congratulate the Asian Development Bank and partners on yet again producing an impressive action-oriented program at the Asian Clean Energy Forum, a landmark event for the region. The Asian Pacific region has made excellent strides on electrification and is spearheading the clean energy story for developing countries and developing economies, with several examples of finance for clean energy projects. Indonesia is scaling up renewable generations to match coal phase down through ADB's energy transition mechanism. Bangladesh has been pursuing the development of its offshore wind capacity. India will be rapidly expanding their utility-scale solar investments to achieve India's ambition 500 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity additional by 2030. And Vietnam is building the foundation for a greater offshore wind market. At the recent SE for All Forum in Kigali, ministers from Asian Pacific and Africa convened to discuss recommendations that will feed into COP27 and the other global discussions on clean energy finance later this year. We are honored to have had ADB's Vice President, Ahmed Saeed, participate at the forum. The outcomes from these discussions were clear. The Asian Pacific journey has been incredible, but there is still a long way to go. And the solutions will vary significantly by country, by region, by technology, and by sector. The recently released SDG 7 tracking report, the electricity access gap in Asia is now around 100 million people, but last mile connectivity and reliability continue to be an issue. And cooking is more problematic, with 1.3 billion people still without access to clean cooking solutions. Several success stories across Asian nations have shown how clean energy development led by private investment can drive job creation and development. By addressing energy access challenges while supporting development and addressing our climate emergency, we can ensure a just and equitable clean energy transition for all. Finally, we must remember that energy security is a real issue, but the energy transition is an opportunity to address it. Thank you.
Thank you, Special Representative Damilola Ogunbiyi. Next, Craig Hart, Acting Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator for Asia, US Agency for International Development, USAID, will share a recorded keynote message on advancing a sustainable energy future together.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so pleased to be here today to offer remarks on behalf of the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. As the 17th Asia Clean Energy Forum comes to a close, I would like to thank the Asian Development Bank, Korea Energy Agency, and other participants who have made this important annual event such a great success. This year's ACEF has highlighted the urgent need to adopt low-carbon strategies and scale up the necessary financing to implement these strategies across the region. Doing so will allow countries to make meaningful advances toward fulfilling their national commitments and net zero targets by mid-century. As USAID Administrator Samantha Power often says, USAID is now a climate agency because climate changes impacts everything that we do. For example, worsening climate conditions can decrease wildlife habitats, which increases contact between humans and animals, putting us at risk for new pandemics. Rising sea levels threaten critical infrastructure, not only roads and bridges, but also schools and hospitals, too. And the need for free and independent media is greater than ever as we rely on reputable journalists to report on climate change impacts. particularly telling the stories of the marginalized and indigenous people who are most affected by climate change. In USAID's recently released climate change strategy, we have committed to working with countries to reduce, avoid, or sequester 6 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. That's the equivalent of basically 6 trillion pounds of coal burned. USAID will also help to mobilize $150 billion in public and private financing by 2030 to help mitigate climate change. But we cannot do this alone. We will build on existing local partnerships and develop new ones to drive innovative solutions to realize a low-carbon and resilient clean energy future. While significant work lies ahead, we should take a moment to look back at what has already been accomplished across the region. In Cambodia, Laos, Thailand, and Vietnam, we helped implement 16 new policies and regulations, resulting in almost $7 billion of renewable energy investments. We have also contributed to preventing an estimated 93 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent in greenhouse gas emissions from being released into the atmosphere over the next 15 years, basically the equivalent of removing 20 million passenger cars from the road for a year. That's just about all the cars in Australia. So in Pakistan, one of the top 10 countries most vulnerable to climate change, USAID is partnering with the government to increase renewable energy sources from the current 5% to 30% by 2030. Since 2018, USAID has advised the government of Pakistan on the addition of 16 wind and solar energy projects now under construction as of 2020. Once complete, these 16 projects will add over 860 megawatts of clean energy to the Pakistani grid, benefiting over 13 million Pakistani families. This will almost double Pakistan's current renewable energy capacity by 2023 and reduce emissions by over 14 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030. Basically, the equivalent of nearly 13 million cars off the road for a year. In India, USAID is contributing to the government of India's goal of constructing 30 million green, energy-efficient, and affordable homes in urban and rural areas. As a result of USAID coordination, in 2021, the Lucknow Development Agency agreed to integrate energy efficiency in their construction procurement practices, as well as construct all future homes to be green. So today, India is one of the top 3 countries in its number of certified green buildings. USAID has been a partner in India's green building movement that has its start more than 20 years ago and supported the formation of the Indian Green Building Council. Finally, we're driving clean, renewable energy forward in Central Asia. Just last year, we celebrated a major milestone when Kazakhstan, the Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan agreed on an action plan to establish a Central Asian regional electricity market that will lower greenhouse gas emissions. I am so proud of what we have been able to accomplish together as we work to transition to clean energy across Asia. ACEF remains the most important energy forum in Asia, a fact USAID is quite proud of, having co-hosted this forum since its inception. The ideas and actions identified this week are crucial to achieving our shared net zero goals, and this is just the beginning. We at USAID are committed to working with all of you on locally led efforts to attract private investment and deploy cutting-edge technologies to tackle the climate crisis head-on. Thank you again for joining us this year at the 17th Asia Clean Energy Forum. I look forward to seeing you all again next year to celebrate and reflect on our collective accomplishments. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Senior Deputy Assistant Administrator Hart. Next, a distinguished panel will discuss seizing the momentum for action. The panel will be moderated by Sujata Gupta, Director, East Asia Sustainable Infrastructure of the Asian Development Bank, and also includes Rachel Kite, Dean, the Fletcher School at Tufts University, Tim Gould, Chief Economist at the International Energy Agency, Jean-Corfi Molot, founding partner of 3Cs and a senior advisor at the World Resource Institute, and Jia-Yong Ping, a senior advisor at Tencent. Sujata, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, depending on which part of the globe you're joining us from. As Stephen said, my name is Sujata Gupta. I am the Director for Sustainable Infrastructure, East Asia Department of the Asian Development Bank. And it's my honor and privilege to be the moderator for this very distinguished panel. We are today very privileged to have eminent experts on this closing plenary. I will briefly introduce our panelists, and more details about them are available on the website for the forum. We will be joined by Tim Gold, who is the Chief Energy Economist at the International Energy Agency, where he provides strategic advice on energy economics across a wide range of IEA activities. Tim is also the head of the Division for Energy Supply and Investment Outlooks, and in which capacity he co-leads the World Energy Outlook, the IEA's flagship publication, and something that we all very often refer to. He also oversees the agency's work on investment and finance, including the World Energy Investment Report. Tim joined IEA in 2008, and prior to that, he worked on European and Eurasian energy issues in Brussels. Our next panelist is Rachel Kite. Rachel Kite is the 14th Dean of the Fletcher School at the Tufts University, and she's the first woman to lead the United States' oldest and globally famous graduate-only school for international affairs. Prior to joining Fletcher, Rachel served as special representative of the UN Secretary General and the Chief Executive Officer of Sustainable Energy for All. She was previously the World Bank Group Vice President and Special Envoy for Climate Change, and also the Vice President at the International Finance Corporation, responsible for ESG risk and business advisory services. Rachel has received numerous awards, and one I really liked was she was named by the Time magazine in 2019 as the 15 women that were leading climate action. In the 2020 UK New Year Honours, Rachel was appointed as CMG for her services to sustainable energy and combating climate change. So warm welcome to you, Rachel. Our next panelist is Dr. Jean-Corfi Molot. She is the founder and CEO of 3Cs, and 3Cs specializes in climate change policy and strategic advice for business and government. She's the senior advisor for World Resources Institute with a focus on new climate economy, climate change, and clean energy issues. And in addition to this, she's the editor of Climate Policy, an academic journal. So from 1987 to 2017, Jan worked with OECD, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, and with the IEA in Paris. She also served as a lead author for the Nobel Prize-winning Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Prior to coming to France, Jan worked with the Pacific Gas and Electric Company, with state and local governments in the United States, and with the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory on Clean Energy Projects. She brings in a wide range of experience to the panel. So Jan, welcome. The final panelist on the panel is Dr. Yongping Zhai. And can I say our own Dr. Yongping Zhai? Because till recently, he was with the Asian Development Bank and had joined the bank in September 2000. And from March 2015 to July 2021, he served as the chief of the energy sector group at ADB, in charge of energy policy formulation and promotion and application of low carbon technologies in Asian developing countries. He also led our knowledge and technical cooperation. In July 2021, he joined Tencent as the senior advisor in the strategy development department, supporting the company's carbon neutrality operations and renewable energy development. Dr. Zhai has graduated from prestigious institutions in the PRC and France. So with this, let's start a discussion with the panel. Now, the title of our panel is Seizing the Momentum. I want all panelists, when they respond, to comment on whether the momentum is adequate or not, or do we need to do a lot more? I would say, do we need to accelerate the momentum? So let me turn to Rachel. Rachel, once again, welcome. With your experience of working at all levels, from policy to practice in the energy sector, in climate change, can you tell us how countries can sustain public, private, as well as public-private collective action on energy transition and other climate initiatives? Rachel?
Well, Sujata, thank you very much. And it's lovely to be on this panel with two old friends as well. So Yongping and Jan, it's great to see you. And I know that when IEA come onto the call, they're going to, well, hopefully they'll talk a little bit about the revisions to the World Energy Outlook, which we expect to see this month, because I think you ask a very important question, which is, do we need more momentum? Yes, but the moment the momentum is, if not going in the wrong direction, is hollowing out a little bit. We have a quite extreme triple whammy of food price, energy price, and inflationary effects around the world, which is having a significant impact on our ability to ramp up really quickly in the energy transition. So let me talk a little bit about that. Obviously, before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we were already experiencing significant disruption in global supply chains. There was already an appraisal of how dependent any supply chain should be on any one sort of point of origin. In particular, if we look at the domination of the solar supply chain by China successfully over the last decades, we were already seeing the price of freight and cargo going up exponentially at some points. Certainly investment deals that I'm working on, we've seen the sort of price of the actual deal going up by almost tenfold once one takes into account changes in freight, dislocation timelines, etc. So we were already experiencing a lot of dislocation. We were already seeing energy prices, fossil fuel energy prices on the up. We were already experiencing the knock-on effects of that, and then the war. So what does this mean? Well, this now means that we now know more than ever that we need to pivot towards this clean energy future and this clean energy transition. This means that we have to sort of take the extraordinary ambition that we can already see within the Asia-Pacific region and deliver on that, but even raise that higher. So India's aspirations not only to increase its renewable energy capacity to meet its own 2030 stretch target. If you think about how much renewable energy then the rest of the world would need, then India has the opportunity to not only meet that extraordinarily ambitious target for its own domestic consumption, but then to become a platform for manufacturing for the rest of the world. And then when you think about how much energy is used in actually the manufacturing of the component parts of the solar supply chain, then even more energy to be directed, energy investment to be directed towards India. And India then could become a platform for Southeast Asia, for Africa, for other parts of the globe. So this is because we've left the transition too late in many countries, especially large emitting countries. And now we have no choice but to go very fast. We're sort of pivoting very hard, which can itself be disruptive. So we have to raise our ambition, and we have to plow forward at a time of global economic insecurity, illiquidity in many countries, debt stress in other countries, and rising inflation. And so therefore the cost of renewables going up for the first time in many parts of the world. So the short answer is we need to go further and faster, and we've left it to a moment where it's actually quite difficult for us to be able to do that, which means that the efficiency with which public money, like those that have been so creatively deployed by the Asia Development Bank and others in the region over the last few years, needs to be even more creatively deployed to leverage more and more private capital. Private capital will have to be pooled in ways that it can get to places that it's not going with scale at the moment. And the policy environment, which I'm sure Jan will talk about as well, the policy environment will need to be significantly clarified and improved, not just in the countries of the Asia Pacific region, but in those countries from where a lot of this finance is supposed to originate. There is still, I think, far too confusing and far too, it's a mosaic of different funds with different risk approaches and different risk appetites. And we really are going to need to find ways to pool public money more effectively to leverage private money better. And we can look at the just transition platforms that have been that people talk about as a result of the agreement in Glasgow for South Africa, but now a lot of the creativity that's being on display for the discussions with Indonesia and for Vietnam. But the question is, how do we have those kinds of just transition platforms for every country? How do we collect and pool the finance so that they are effective? The final thing I would say, just to provoke, and then I'm sure we can come to it, is if we are now in the business of creating just transition energy platforms for countries that need to move very quickly away from their very heavily carbonized energy systems, and that the international community understands and agrees that it has to support that, you have to ask, why is a lot of the capital trapped in the multilateral development bank system not being used as the foundational place for those platforms? I don't think that's a question so much for the Asia Development Bank, that is using a lot of creativity. But we have a lot of funds stuck in the multilateral development bank system that are not being deployed with enough ambition in the short term. Happy to talk later about why I think we can't ignore access, and that access, while we see a massive ramp up in renewable energy, a needed massive ramp up in renewable energy in terms of grid connected and the quality of the grids, all of this investment that must increase, we have to not lose sight of the 100 million people in the region and another few 100 million people who don't have any access to energy across the developing world. And again, we know a lot about how to solve that problem, but to date, that the solutions for that have often been left to the last mile. And I think there is a real case, still a real case for making the last mile first. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Rachel. Several leading questions jump to mind, but we'll come back to you later. And let me now turn to Jan. Jan, again, you have a lot of experience. And can you tell us what models or what best cases can serve as models to overcome challenges to the implementation of the Paris Agreement?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sujata. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone today. I think the opportunity is huge in Asia Pacific region. It's a region that anyone interested in clean energy in the world, and we all should be, will be watching carefully, and some of us have been engaged in over the years. I know ADB is well placed to help make this transition happen, but as Rachel pointed out, no, it's not happening fast enough. It's about scale and speed is perhaps even a bigger challenge in today's world than scale, because renewables have come along in such a good way. What we have seen is huge price declines, not just in this region, but worldwide. In Asia Pacific, the Asia Pacific region, I think, has an opportunity to lead, and some countries have been leading. I want to talk about a couple of examples, which I'm sure the specialists know, but perhaps not everyone in your audience. But first of all, just to kind of give the backdrop, if you look at I pulled up some recent research on the topics and that you're dealing with today. And what we see in the research is that renewable energy is already accounting for about 80% of total investments in energy transition technologies. If you think about clean energy space, it has to come along. Renewable energy can't do it on its own. It has to come along with investments in the grid, which is typically an afterthought and needs to be brought along in parallel. What you also need is as was mentioned earlier in the case of India, parallel investment in energy efficiency. As you know so well, Sujata, energy efficiency will bring down the demand. The scale of demand growth in this region in particular is massive. And what you have to do is accompany the growth in demand with investments in energy efficiency so that supply can come along in a timely way. Renewable energy is more capital intensive, requires, and it's relatively new if you look at power markets. So even though it's proven technology, and I'm going to talk about solar in a moment, I think the markets still price out newer technologies in a more expensive way, which is a challenge particularly in lower income developing countries where you have weaker capital markets. So, aside from in the region, aside from middle income countries like China and India, Malaysia, you have this challenge of weak local capital markets and limited access to debt financing. And what debt financing is there can be higher costs comparatively for various reasons, with the market prices out political risks, among other barriers. So what that means is that getting to the right outcome, getting the renewables built, even though they are technically cost effective, is just costly and complex to organize. There's also a history in the region. There's a history of subsidies in the utility sector. It's not the only developing region with that being the case, of course, but what that means is raises the stakes for really rapid and deep regulatory reforms to bring about viable partners to build up the renewables industry. I'm going to talk about solar because I've been working with World Resources Institute. WRI has partnered with ISA in the region, so International Solar Alliance, whose mission is really to bring solar investment to scale and with speed by 2030. We are working with them on a roadmap, and so we've been looking kind of in depth at what individual countries have been doing. I think India, I'll flag India, perhaps it's a well-known case, but for me, it's a decade-long experience where you had an initial national solar mission in 2009, set out the vision. You had high-level political commitment. You still have that today. You have extremely ambitious targets. Damiola mentioned 500 gigawatts. I actually thought it was 300, but 500 is even more massive by 2030. The capacity has already grown over the last decade at a record speed. I think today we have about 49 gigawatts of solar, and that's up from just 1.3 in 2012. So what is that? 50-fold increase in about a decade. It's massive. But how, the real question is, how has that happened? And of course, it still only accounts for a fraction, 4 or 5% of power generation today. So gradual transition has occurred where the government initially financed incentive mechanisms and now are transitioning to competitive market mechanisms to bring in that solar power. They've offered guarantees, the government has offered guarantees for power purchase agreements and contracted capacity, which provides a more stable market for investors. It has attracted private investment. Part of the way they've done that is through regulatory reform. So it illustrates the point I made earlier, where they essentially have floated government bonds to finance and support their distribution companies, and the reforms have succeeded in improving cash flow, in improving the investment attractiveness and the service quality in the region. So as a whole, I'd say, India's really kind of shown us a pathway which can and should be replicated in other countries. Of course, India has a well-organized government and a strong capacity, institutional capacity that they're building on. So this is something perhaps a bigger challenge in other smaller countries. I did want to say that they are successfully transitioning into commercial financing, and I really do for solar. I do think that's the key to scale. And that is partly a virtuous cycle where you have, experience, initially subsidized projects being demonstrated, being rolled out and moved in with increasingly high levels of commercial finance, and has created this cycle where domestic project developers, domestic financial institutions, and companies, have gained experience over time and are now really leaders in the region, in the field. And one other, and I'll just close in if you'll give me one more minute. We have another really exciting example in Vietnam. Of course, Vietnam is a much smaller country, but the potential and the success so far in scaling solar has been huge. And part of that is political leadership, but part of it is also stable policy. Of course, there's a huge amount still to be done. What we have seen in Vietnam is reform in the utility sector, which is another one of the keys, but also really pragmatic measures like land lease payment exemptions, bring down the cost of land. India did that as well. Solar requires a lot of land. These specific pieces to put the puzzle together to make solar attractive for the private sector and investment to flow there are really what's needed, tailored responses in each country. A lot more to be done in Vietnam, where you have, of course, opportunity that is much bigger than what's already been developed, and some transition, I think, and gap in the long-term planning cycle and policy continuity questions, which raise uncertainty and will raise costs. But those things are being tackled, I think, forcefully by the government, and I'm very hopeful that it will continue. This pace will continue. So I think I'll leave that with for the opening comments, and thank you for that. And listen to my other colleagues on the panel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jan. We've also been joined by Tim. So welcome, Tim. I've already introduced you, so the audience already is familiar with your background. So warm welcome. Let me move to Yongping. Yongping, with the bank, you've seen the sovereign side, and now you're working with the private sector. So what do MDBs, governments need to do more and or better to deliver this maximum private sector potential to achieve, again, the goals of the Paris Agreement. Yongping, over to you. I think Yongping is having an issue with the internet connection. Let's give him 5 seconds. If not, then we will move on to talk to Tim. Yongping. So Yongping can hear us, but we cannot hear him. And Yongping, your frame is frozen. Okay, so if it's all right, Yongping, we will come back to you. Yes, please rejoin. Thank you. Tim, welcome. And prior to your joining us, we were hearing Rachel, and she was mentioning that you may have some interesting news for us in terms of an update on the energy scenarios. But I had also said that, are we really generating enough momentum to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement? One has seen reports which say that if we continue at the current pace, by 2030, we would have put enough greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to guarantee a 1.5 degree centigrade increase in temperature already. So let's hear from you in terms of what we can do to really accelerate this momentum. Where are the areas identified by the IEA in the energy sector, and how national governments, when faced with competing demands on their resources, would meet these? Over to you, Tim.
Well, thanks very much indeed, Sujata. And there's a lot of issues in there that maybe I'd like to comment on briefly. I think, first of all, to agree with you strongly that, we are well off track. And really, there is such a limited emissions budget available for a 1.5 degree stabilization. And we are indeed using that up at a rate that cannot be maintained if we are serious about targeting that kind of stabilization in global average temperatures. So we don't have a great deal of time. And of course, we have a lot of distractions now, big distractions with the global food crisis, with the global energy crisis. And the message from the IEA is that we shouldn't solve or try and solve any of our immediate issues in ways that make that climate crisis more difficult to tackle. In our view, you don't have to choose. There are all sorts of accessible ways, cost competitive ways, to address current issues in a way that moves us towards solving our climate issues as well. Now, there are all sorts of indicators to show that we are off track. I mean, one of the things that we'll be releasing next week is some updated analysis on the amount of capital that's flowing into the global energy sector. And it does have some encouraging messages. The amount that's spent on clean energy transitions is picking up. However, the additional money that's coming in to clean energy technologies around the world is largely concentrated in advanced economies and in China. And there is still a significant deficit of spending, particularly in other emerging and developing economies. And if you look at the aggregate amount of money that's spent on energy transitions in that grouping, we're still stuck pretty much at the level where we were in 2015. Now, Now, that money goes further than it used to because the costs of those technologies has come down significantly. But in our view, there's so much more to be done. And I think Jan just highlighted many of the policy areas that would need to be addressed in order to unlock flows of capital into those very cost competitive technologies that are now available. Some people find parallels between the current situation and where we were back in the 1970s with the first oil shocks. And indeed, those oil shocks, they did lead to inflation. They led to, consumers suffered, economies suffered in many cases. But they also unlocked a wave of innovation, a wave of spending on alternative ways to tackle energy security worries. And I think what we need to be very conscious of now is the need to try and channel some of that urgency into the technologies that would also help us bring down emissions. We're convinced it can be done, and we are very much looking forward to working with the ADB and other partners to try and make sure that happens as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Tim. Tim, you said it's not a question of choice, right? It's we can address or tackle the problem on both fronts or on all fronts. Why do you say that, if I may ask you? Because very often we hear in the media and that the focus will now move towards food, more essential, rather than investments in renewable energy. So what's making IEA say that it's not a question of choice?
I think when you look at the issue of high prices, I mean, what are the prices that are concerning people at the moment? It's the price of oil. It's the price of natural gas. I mean, in some countries, it's even the price of coal as well. I mean, these fossil fuel prices are causing all sorts of difficulties for our economies, and they're also contributing via fertilizers and other things to the rise in food prices. So if we can accelerate the deployment of technologies that are proven, that are low emissions, that are clean, and that are, at today's prices, incredibly cost competitive, then we contribute to resolving other issues as well. I mean, including our climate, the urgent problem, the urgent issue of climate change.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll come back and discuss this further, but I think we have Yongping back with us. Yongping?
I hope so.
Yeah, welcome back again.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So Yongping, I was wondering from you've looked at the sovereign side, the private sector side, what can MDBs and governments do more of and better that would encourage and maximize the private sector's potential, both in terms of financing and technology?
Thank you, Sujata. I was saying it's a great pleasure to be back at ASEF, even it's just virtually. But I know I have hope that the next year we'll be able to meet face to face, and nothing can replace face-to-face meeting. Hoping next year. But for now, let me share some of my reflections on the question you raised, since, as you mentioned, that I worked at Asian Development Bank for 20 years. Actually, prior to that, I worked at African Development Bank for 7 years. So almost 27, close 30 years in MDBs. When I started my career, was my early 30s, I was young at that time. I realized that our mandate as a project officer at AFDB was to deliver big project, whether it's a big hydro or coal-fired power plant, transmission lines, but the purpose was to deliver on economic growth, because the theory was with growth, you will be able to reduce the poverty. But after that, when I moved to Manila at Asian Development Bank, we were seeing at that time, I was seeing the financial crisis in Asia. We realized that economic growth was not enough to combat poverty. So inclusive growth would be needed. Then that's second part of the mandate. You have economic growth over there, but poverty reduction. On top of that, two big challenges we have since a decade or even more than that, we have to deal with this, all sorts of environmental issues and climate crisis. So for MDB, we have to deliver on three things: economic growth, poverty reduction, and all kind of climate, environmental climate actions. Compared to these mandates required to us on MDBs, I think, frankly, our resources are too small. I recently was invited by AIIB to give, again, some sort of reflection with my 30 years work at MDBs. I told very frankly, our resources are too small compared to the huge mandate we have to address. That said, we cannot hope that we'll be having 100 times more resources. MDBs are very powerful. I would say we are powerful not because we have a lot of money, our money is small, but we are a policy power because we are supported by shareholders. We interact with governments, we interact with all stakeholders in all these issues I just mentioned. Last year, before I left ADB, I was leading the energy policy update process for ADB. When I thought that for small money we're giving, but the importance or the attention attracted from all over the world and stakeholders was so impressive. So many people wanted to tell us how important this policy is. Because I think MDBs should play a role beyond just that amount of money. We are powerful, we can work on policy issues. We are sort of a policy power because we have stakeholders, we have people, we interact with stakeholders, and that's our mandate. I think for climate issues, we should perhaps, of course, we deliver on loans, grants, technical assistance. We should maximize our policy action and improve the conditions for private sector to come in. So that's first reflection. Second part on private sector. Now I'm working at Tencent. Tencent is a leading, I would say, equivalent of big tech in the world. In the US, it's a big tech here. In China, when I think about private sector, we often thought about easily the commercial banks, investors, developers, sometimes startup companies and so on. But I think big techs should be very, very important part of private sector. They can play a role. They have some money. I will not mention that they do have some money to invest, but I think they have a sort of a platform power. Compared to reference to my earlier, I said the policy power of MDBs. I think big techs, they are sort of a platform power. They connect people through mobile phones, through software, through systems. And this is very powerful. If we can use wisely the platform power as part of a private sector action, we should be able to bring more money needed for this. So unusual combination of MDBs with policy power and big techs with the platform power, we may be able to bring more money to deliver on these three big challenges, that is economic growth, poverty reduction, and climate actions. And I would like to actually give some details in my next round of, if we do have the chance to come back, if we have time, to share with you what specifically a big tech company can deliver as a private sector. We can work on many things, but I leave it to next round. Next round, please.
Okay, thank you, Yongping. So excellent. Let's go to the next round right away. And let me go back to Rachel. Rachel, you said you were being provocative in terms of saying funds are stuck with the MDBs. Can you elaborate more and say
Sure.
what MDBs can do?
Sure. I mean, I mean, all the comments that have been made so far are correct, right? That we have to leverage private investment in to make these energy transitions, but there are many transitions that have to be underway in order to meet the 1.5 target that we've set for ourselves. And so it is about the deployment of that public capital in the most effective ways. And go back to what Tim was saying and what the IEA has been completely clear about before the outbreak of the war in Ukraine, but has been very clear about in the last few weeks, is that we cannot abandon a first priority around energy efficiency, obviously in high emitting countries, but not only, right? We need to really push much further into the first fuel, which is energy efficiency. And there's some very strong comments that came out of that for the ministerial last week. And then we need an extraordinary ramp up in renewable energy capacity, which means that, as I said, it's not just that India has to meet its own domestic needs. India has to become a manufacturing, focal point for the renewable energy industry, solar, presumably, so that we can then imagine that we can build green hydrogen hubs around the world and that we can diversify these supply chains so that they're not overly dependent on one particular country. We can't forget off-grid, right? So all of this has to happen, and all of this has to happen very quickly now, because we cannot be, on the hook of volatile and high fossil fuel energy prices, which we can expect to see, stretching out into next year and the year after. So lots of reasons to not be distracted by a short-term crisis, and the onus on that lies with the G7 and with the G20, even though the G20 is having problems, I think, working smoothly this year because of its makeup. So so the context for my comments about the MDBs is, if you look at the climate impacts we're already experiencing, and you look at the value at risk, country by country by country, from climate impacts already, then, and I believe that the Asia Development Bank's energy policy review was extremely well done, and it's a very good policy. But more broadly, beyond just the energy policies, the mandate of the MDBs is to preserve their capital, to be there as the counter-cyclical response mechanism for crisis. But we are in a compound set of crises that we've never been in before. And so I think that the question is really, is the AAA rating of a multilateral development bank the most important thing, or is finding very creative ways to take a little bit more risk to speed up this renewable energy transition? Is that actually worth a more profound look? It's not about an energy policy, it's about the actual mechanisms of how these MDBs work. And I would look at the Inter-American Development Bank's private sector arm, IDB Invest, which has concluded that to originate in order to hold is perhaps not the best business model for a particular moment in our history, where the value at risk across the Latin American region, the extraordinary demands in a region that has to pivot much more quickly to clean energy, that perhaps the IDB Invest should be more focused on originating to distribute into the private sector. And I think these are the kinds of conversations that need, and that I know that they're already going on in many development funds, bilateral and multilateral. But honestly, I think development finance has to take more risk if we're going to drive through the transition, given the warnings and given the pathways that IEA has carefully laid out for us.
Thank you, Rachel. And this reminds me of what we are trying to do in the Northeast Asia region, in ADB. This is not related to investments, but there is a massive potential for renewable energy in Mongolia, and it can meet the energy requirements of the entire Northeast Asia region. But the challenge is political. How do we invest in this and get this to all the neighboring countries who have targets under the Paris Agreement? So very, very interesting. Since we're talking about policy, let me ask Jan. Jan, you said, you spoke about scale and speed, and you did mention the word which is in a way taboo, which is subsidies. I was on another panel, and there somebody said, if you remove fossil fuel subsidies, all matters would be resolved. Do you think that that is sufficient, or we need more policies to speed up and scale up our interventions? Jan, over to you.
Yes, thanks for asking that question, Sujata. And you know that OECD, which is my alma mater, has spent decades working on that, in part with leadership, of course, with leadership from OECD countries. But the subsidies problem persists. It's not just in OECD countries, though they tend to be biggest in OECD countries most historically. And then there has been progress. Fossil fuel subsidies are coming down. There's a good trend on that. Is it sufficient? No. Is it going to propel us into the scale and speed of renewable investment that we need, even if we took all the subsidies away today? No. So yes, we need fossil fuel subsidy reform. That's a constant agenda. It's an urgent agenda. Makes absolutely no sense in today's world, even with these crises. The opportunity space, as I think Tim started to mention, is to really get it right as we move away from fossil fuels for economic and for energy security and environmental reasons, to get it right today, to invest instead of new supply in the fossil fuel arena, which presumably does not need public subsidy to happen on its own, rather the opposite, to begin to put a price on carbon. I mean, that's the standard response, but a price on carbon makes absolutely no sense if we haven't leveled the playing field, if we continue to subsidize fossil fuels. Now, I just wanted to flag that it's easier, and most of the measurement that occurs around fossil fuel subsidies, most of what we know about it really does come from the supply side. At the same time, what we see when we look carefully, for example, I was going through the India example earlier, when you look carefully at how, for example, the utility sector is run, in many countries, we cross-subsidize the price of electricity with the policy goal in mind that this is a pro-growth, a anti-poverty measure. And that indirectly can be subsidized, essentially a fossil fuel electricity system. So we have to dig deeper into the way we use, in the way we distribute, the way we invest in clean energy and energy as a whole, to unravel the depth and the spread of subsidies across our economies. And that can be done well. I mean, there are countries that have successfully reformed fossil fuel subsidies. I think this is where we see some promising reversals in the way investments occur. But it has to be done with notice. It has to be done with social support policy as well, to support those who can, on the margins of the economy, the poorest, who might be hit first and hardest with such reforms. So there has to be support mechanisms as we go ahead to take care of the marginalized people who can otherwise suffer with those reforms.
Right, so thank you for that. And Tim, what can we do to accelerate?
Am I giving the closing remark?
Yes, you are, DG. Keep going, Sujata.
So Tim, what can we do to accelerate the deployment of investment in these clean technologies? And you said especially this needs to be done in the smaller economies. So Tim?
So I think when it comes to the technologies, in a sense, that are ready for the big time, it's really about addressing some of the non-market barriers to their deployment. And I think we've discussed already some of the approaches that, and I think, Rachel talked very persuasively about the areas that we need to focus on when you talk about the the continued importance of efficiency, the urgency of getting more renewables into the mix. I think one of the things that we also try and focus on at IEA, and I think this needs to be also very important for public institutions in looking at working with developing and emerging economies, is the fact that these economies are also urbanizing, they are industrializing. I mean, we cannot imagine that efficiency and clean electricity are going to be the solutions to all of the issues that these countries face. I mean, if you look at India, for example, you know, over the next 10 years, India's urban population, the additional people coming to India's towns and cities, I mean, that's another 6 or 7 Mumbais just in 10 years' time. And that's not going to be solved only by the sorts of things that we've talked about now. So we need to be also having conversations about cement. We need to also have conversations about steel, about all of the things that build up a modern infrastructure for an economy. And there, I think there is a clear need for engagement by financial institutions of all types to help, in a sense, dirty sectors become cleaner, to help some of the more carbon intensive sectors, you know, map out a pathway to becoming, to finding their path, finding their place in a low emissions economy. So I think even as we focus on, you know, accelerating the inflow of clean technologies into the system, we also have to have very much in mind, you know, these other sectors that are essential to a modern economy, where some of the technology solutions are not yet as mature, and where there is a strong need for continued innovation and continued public support in order to try and get those costs down and some of those cleaner sort of heavy industrial products into the system. And I think, you know, freight transport is another good example of an area that needs a lot of attention in that regard.
Very, very true. We can't just focus on the energy sector. We have to have a more integrated approach. Yongping, you said that you had an example that you wanted to discuss and tell us about in terms of what the private sector can do. And I liked your new definition of PPP. Instead of being public-private partnership, it's policy power, it's platform power with the private sector. So let's hear from you what model that is being adopted by Tencent.
Yes, I'm new at Tencent just a year, but I've been thinking how best a big tech company like Tencent can contribute to these climate actions, decarbonization process. My conclusion is, yes, we can do big with our platform power. This platform power can actually make the limited financing resources bigger. The impact can become bigger in a way that with digital technologies, we can integrate more renewable energy in smart grid system. That's clear. With digital technologies, we can reduce demand through demand side actions, with demand side response. And with digital technologies, we can trade a green power, green energy, and the carbon reductions in different trading platforms, in carbon market, in power market, so on. So I think digital technologies is an enabler to a decarbonization process. Now, specifically for a big tech company like Tencent, we should first of all showing an example of how, as a big company with 100,000 employees, serving entire nation with over 1.3 billion of subscribers for our services. So how Tencent can play a role, showing an example that a company like this should reach carbon neutral by setting a target. Yes, we have set a target of reaching carbon neutral by 2030. That's 30 years earlier than the national target of achieving carbon neutrality in China by 2060. So Tencent has decided to set an ambitious goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2030. Through three ways. One is improving our energy efficiency in internet data centers. So that's very important. We should invest, actually using our money to buy, to invest in renewable energy, solar, wind, and other forms of, we're thinking also geothermal, so that the internet data centers can use green power produced by these renewable energy facilities. And we can also participate in carbon trading systems, so that if whatever, there's still a gap for us to meet, we can go through the market-based system to make sure that we achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, but this carbon credit we're going to buy will be our last resort. We'll focus on energy efficiency and renewable energy. But that is only a small part of contribution a big tech company can do. A bigger role for big tech is to contribute to the nation, to the whole society in supporting the decarbonization, achieving the national target. Again, there are three ways of doing this. We can use our platform power to influence the behaviors of consumers. Through, for example, I'm going to office. I never drive cars, and by doing this way, walking or taking a bus, I can get kind of credit, and this credit can be translated into some reward, or even eventually, if combined with others, we can contribute to carbon trading in small way. So influencing, improving the lifestyle or a new lifestyle that is low carbon. That's one thing we can do. Secondly, I mentioned this earlier, we can invest in renewable energy projects, not only for our own data centers. We can invest in big way that we contribute to renewable energy development in the country with the financial resources we have. That's a second way Tencent can contribute. The third one is we are looking at all different technologies, low carbon technologies. What are these technologies in early stage of development? As a leading high-tech company, we should support these emerging technologies that will play a bigger role in 30 years from now, but they're still in early stage. So we should identify these needed technologies at the early stage of development. We can support them through our money, but also through the digital systems we're going to deploy. So make sure that these new technologies can play fully their role in 30 years, and that by that time, China or other countries will be able to make full use of these low carbon technologies in meeting the target. I think that's specifically what Tencent can do in supporting climate actions. I'm aware that many big tech companies are doing similar things. We can join hands, and not only among us, but also working with stakeholders, with MDBs. Actually, I started in small way, some form of initial cooperation with ADB, with MDBs, whether there is a scope for us to work on some of the digital technology deployment in climate mitigation, maybe also in climate adaptation. So again, to conclude, I would like to say that MDBs has a huge influence in terms of their policy power, and big tech with our platform system, the platform power, we should form a new PPP with all partners. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your key message there. And let me turn to the other panelists and very, very briefly, one key message in 30 seconds. Let me turn to Jan. Your key message for our audience, 30 seconds.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to highlight this innovation platform idea is an extraordinarily powerful one. And I'm excited to hear Young Ping talk about this, and that he has this vast experience from the MDB world, bringing it into the private sector, huge opportunity for collaboration, and that can be transformative. So I'll leave it at that. That's my 30 seconds. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Let me move to Rachel.
Yeah, I think it's about aligning the public with the private and taking more risk. We're running out of time and we're running out of carbon budget, and we have a lot of people's needs still to meet.
Thank you. Tim?
I probably also have a message about alignment, because we hear a lot about, division, fragmentation or something, but let's remember that we have an extraordinary alignment now of technological drivers, sort of economic incentives, and now energy security imperatives, pushing us in the direction of investment in cleaner, more efficient technologies. Let's take advantage of that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. So I think we've had very, very rich discussions, and I will not attempt to summarize these. And all I can say is that I'd like to thank all our panelists for, I would say, their energy, their vision, and also a very practical approach. So I'm sure that the audience has gained a lot from our discussions. They have a lot of encouragement and guidance in terms of, we can do it. Yes, we can do it. So with this, thank you, everyone. And I personally have benefited a lot from this discussion. With this, let me hand it over to Steve Peters. Steve, over to you.
Thank you, Sujata, and thank you to your distinguished panel. It was a wonderful panel. I was listening intently. It's my pleasure now to introduce Bruno Cascalar. Bruno is the Director General of the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, and he is also concurrently Chief Compliance Officer at the ADB. Director General, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Esteemed colleagues and participants at the Asian Clean Energy Forum, ladies and gentlemen, warm regards to all. Please allow me to first thank everyone for joining us at this year's Asian Clean Energy Forum. I understand that there were some 3,000 participants during the 4-day event, and that's fantastic. I also would like to congratulate you for making this meeting a very productive and, pardon the pun, a highly energizing conference. From the outset of this year's forum, the need for tangible results and urgent action have been at the forefront and represent recurrent themes of our discussions. As you know, what we do matters a great deal to Asia and the Pacific, and by extension to the entire world. The Asia Pacific region accounts for approximately 60% of the world's population. It also produces about a third of the world's gross domestic product. It consumes half of the global energy supply as well. And it is responsible for about half of the global emissions from fuel combustion, nearly 2/3 of which come from coal. However, as we drill down deeper, we note the figures on inclusion and the need to place into perspective that still some 157 million people remain without electricity access, and approximately 1.67 billion without access to clean cooking. As we saw in the discussions leading to the approval of ADB's energy policy last year, we have to get the right balance between energy access and security, as well as sustainability and climate resilience. We have to work in parallel. Over the past 4 days, we've had 32 sessions covering various topics guided by the theme, innovative and integrated solutions for a low carbon and resilient future. Thanks to our speakers, we've had very insightful presentations that have stimulated fruitful discussions in these areas. These are policy reforms for clean energy development, innovative low carbon technologies, and business models, as well as Paris-aligned financing and integrated approaches for generating cross-sectoral benefits. We've also had information discussions about activities in the sub-regions. For example, the ongoing efforts to promote renewable energy integration in South Asia and holistic cross-sectoral interventions in the Pacific. There's also the efficient district heating and cooling solutions in East Asia, as well as innovative technologies and solutions and green financing in Central and Southeast Asia. The forum, ladies and gentlemen, also provided the opportunity to address special topics such as scaling up carbon capture utilization and storage, energy efficiency, and integrated planning for energy systems, and cooling solutions for a more equitable future in the deep dive workshops and spotlight sessions. As we wrap up this forum, we need to internalize and process what we've heard and discussed. We have to identify the information and ideas that we can apply to our work in whatever field that may be. So far, we feel that we can push forward a more ambitious and collaborative energy transition towards attaining climate goals. Allow me to make a few suggestions here. First, we are a solutions bank where we need to invest in research and development or knowledge and make sure that once tested, it can be embodied in our projects. Knowledge combined with financing is what will make us more effective in building a robust and resilient pipeline of projects to better address the complex development challenges and succeed as a solutions bank. In the Sustainable Development and Climate Change Department, our work can be boiled down to three things: KPI, knowledge, partnerships, and innovation. We need to keep innovating in several dimensions. Given the worsening effects of climate change, there is a growing need to make clean energy development more climate resilient. For instance, in the Pacific, ADB has been providing assistance in deploying climate adaptive floating solar technology. Innovations in technologies must be accompanied by paradigm shifts in policies, market structures, and business models. These are needed to facilitate and increase renewable energy development, improve energy access, and amplify energy efficiency. We also need to enhance access to clean energy to include cooking, cooling, and heating, plus distributed energy systems for remote areas. An example is conditional cash transfers for women to encourage the use of cleaner cooking technologies. This is reported to improve health and education outcomes in various low-income households. Second, we should pursue integrated solutions by leveraging efforts to achieve holistic cross-sectoral benefits. While the energy transition creates opportunities, it also runs the risk of negatively affecting workers and communities. Unless we address the displacement of workers from closing of coal mines and providing the means towards a just transition, it will be hard to push the climate change envelope. Programs need to be designed to ensure that no one is left behind and that energy transition is pursued in a just manner. The most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change include the poor, women and girls, children, as well as small island nations. A just energy transition takes into account their plight. We should go beyond electricity access and look at productive uses of energy. An example of an integrated and cross-sectoral solution in desalination using renewable technologies. This produces benefits in promoting clean energy and improving fresh water supplies. Third, we need to promote synergy and collaboration. We need to share best practices and lessons learned from implementing clean energy projects. This forum is one of the many ways to do this. We at ADB have strong convening power, and we need to use this to our collective advantage. Given the huge amounts of financing needed, partnerships among multilateral, national, and private sector institutions and other donors have to be expanded. A case in point is the Clean Energy Financing Partnership Facility. Regional and interregional cooperation also has to be strengthened. Rest assured, ladies and gentlemen, that ADB is doing its share in the common effort of advancing innovative and integrated solutions towards a low carbon and resilient future. We are stepping up our financing for path paving green energy projects. ADB has also raised its commitment from 80 billion to 100 billion in cumulative climate finance between 2019 and 2030. Moving forward, ADB is utilizing innovative financing models like our energy transition mechanism to pursue critical decarbonization objectives, such as the replacement of existing coal power plants with renewable energy facilities, starting with Indonesia and the Philippines. Also important are ADB's efforts to improve information and knowledge sharing. Under our One ADB approach, we can bring together knowledge and expertise across the organization. This enables us to collaborate more effectively with our partners in designing, implementing, and monitoring projects. We are building communities of collaboration within and beyond the region. Indeed, ADB values a clean energy development that fosters inclusive and sustainable growth for a low carbon and resilient future. In closing, allow me to thank you once again to all our partners, our presenters, and participants in this virtual conference. Let us bring our message of hope and call to action back to our developing member countries. On this note, I formally declare the Asia Clean Energy Forum 2022 concluded. Please take care and have a pleasant day.